Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Colonati. Today I'm going to do a quick wrap up of the books that I read for Translateathon in the second half of June. I did a TBR for this readathon and I did not read everything on my TBR. I kind of changed some of my plans and then just decided to not try to push myself to get to everything in those 2 weeks because I was reading other things as well. But it was still a really fun Translateathon and I'm super happy about things that I did end up reading. My favorite read was the last minute addition to my TBR that came in the mail like right after I posted my TBR video. This is Jaguars Tomb by Angelica Gorodischer, translated by Amalia Gladheart. And I've already done a video on this with my super rushed first impressions after I finished it. I loved this book. It is definitely like literary fiction with this little bit of speculative element to it, and I love the way that the story was structured, that it's all these fictional writers writing about each other, like each writer is actually a fictional character in the other writer's book or fragment of a book, and it was a really interesting way to tell this story and to explore the themes of disappearance and loss of people and working through that and writing through that. So I love this. I love the translation as well, and I just really want more by Gorodischer now. Then I read Hat Atelier Volume 4 by Kamome Shirahama, translated by Kohler. I have started to super enjoy this series. When I read the first volume of it, I thought, well, this seems like a pretty run-of-the-mill, like middle grade fantasy. Very typical stuff going on, but the artwork is just gorgeous and the magic system is pretty unusual and different. And I've warmed up to it more and more over the first 4 volumes. There are darker aspects being introduced, pretty complicated characters, and it doesn't seem to be quite as pitched as young as I thought it was. In fact, I think this is published in an adult manga magazine or something, so my impression that it was for only younger audiences is probably wrong. At this point, I'm classifying it as YA, and I might drop that classification at some point too. The basic story of this manga is about a little girl named Coco who wants to learn to be a witch, but she's been told, and like all of society's been told, that you have to be born a witch. You can't just decide to be one and learn how to be one. And then she's given a book of magic by a mysterious person, and then something happens to her mother and suddenly she gets whisked off to learn how to be a witch, so basically she can save her mother. And this whole world of how magic actually works is opened up to her, and all the rules, and like this massive schism within the magical world. You have the good guys and the good magic with lots of rules and limitations on one side, and then you have the other side, which practices the darker magic and the stuff that you're not supposed to do. So it's become really interesting, and the artwork continues to be absolutely gorgeous. The character designs are super striking. I think there are a lot of different types of characters in this as well, some people with very different personalities, and my major takeaway from volume 4 is that there was a lot of character development as well as some pretty obvious messages and themes in this one, and I feel like there's a lot of time being taken to explore all of the characters and their journeys and not just Coco, which I like. And I really hope that in the next volume we learn more about Kifri's past, because he's Coco's teacher and there is something going on with that dude and nobody knows what it is. I want to know. So moving on, I read Helgoland by Carlo Rovelli. This is translated by Segre and somebody else whose name I don't remember. So this is a nonfiction book about quantum theory. Rovelli is a quantum physicist or theoretical physicist. I've read a couple of his previous books on this topic, and this one is interesting because I think at one point he describes it himself as like a meditation on reality. It's partially him recounting the history of how quantum theory was born, you know, back in the early 1910s up through the 1940s, and some of the major people like Heisenberg who were involved in that. And this is partly history I've heard before, but the way that he tells it is very very different. His style of telling it is very different here, and I really liked that. And then it kind of segues into his own journey into becoming a physicist and why that intrigued him in the first place. And then he starts discussing basically how quantum theory completely changes the way that we look at and try to analyze and measure reality. My takeaway from this was this idea of how we cannot just look at objects and different discrete things and measure their properties. We're now looking at how they work in relation with everything else. It's not just things standing on their own anymore, it's how they are related to each other. You cannot, like, this is not the mechanical universe where you can just take things apart and study one thing. It's all connected and they all influence each other, which is a really interesting way of talking about how quantum theory, quantum physics is so different from the more mechanical physics that we're usually taught in school, you know? So I enjoyed this, but I will admit that I did not understand a lot of what he was talking about in the last section. I think it's part 3, and I've actually re-listened to some bits of that on audio to try to remember more of it. So I think this is a book that I'll actually come back to again and maybe understand a bit more what he's talking about after multiple rereads. And lastly, I read Clouds, Wasps, and Birds by Aristophanes, translated by Peter Meineck. This particular volume, called Aristophanes 1, there is no Aristophanes 2 as far as I can tell, was published in 1998, and I gather that the translations in this were ones that Meineck worked on over a number of years in the 1990s for productions of these plays that he was involved in. So they're not just translations, they're also how he wanted to put on these plays, basically. So there are more stage directions and some things changed a little bit for the performance value for a modern audience. I chose to read this one rather than a translation I had from the 1960s simply because it is more modern, and it was really interesting. I am not at all knowledgeable about ancient Greek plays, comedy, drama, tragedy, whatever. So I have no idea how accurate or how closely this translation hews to the meaning of the original. There are a ton of footnotes and endnotes to explain the context, which is important because as far as I can tell, these comedies basically exist just to massively send up Athenian politics and political figures of the time. Like, so many real people are mentioned in these plays with lots of digs and jabs about them and stereotypes and stuff. Is very interesting. Clouds is a comedy, like all three of these are comedies. Aristophanes was like a master of comedy. So Clouds is about a man who is in massive debt because he's been spending a lot of money, mostly like on his son, who's really into horse racing. And he decides he's going to send his son to basically be like tutored under Socrates so that his son can learn how to argue and make arguments in order to get his father's debts reduced. Only his son refuses to go, so the father goes instead. But he's basically a super backwards idiot who turns everything into really foul-mouthed jokes, and Socrates just can't with him. Yeah, this one, I think this particular comedy is really well known for the way that it caricatures Socrates, and I thought the way that it caricatures and parodies like all of the, not exactly academics, but the philosophers and stuff was pretty funny. Wasps is about a man who is addicted to being on a jury. So this one relies on knowing a lot about how the Athenian political and judicial systems work, and what exactly this old man loves about being a jurist or a juror, whatever you call that. He's so obsessed with it. His son has basically like imprisoned him in their home to keep him away from it, and it just, yeah. The title Wasps comes from the fact that when all the jurors show up, they literally have wasp stingers on their butts. Yeah. This one has some really interesting and funny physical comedy to it. And then the last one, Birds, is about two men who have left Athens kind of in a huff. They are seeking out the birds who are free, and when they meet the birds, they convince them to set up their own like cloud cuckoo land or whatever it's called, but then it basically starts turning into Athens. This is like, no matter where you go, you're going to start setting up a society with rules and laws, and it's going to become the thing that you didn't like in the first place. At least that's my takeaway from it. I didn't actually love that one. I think that the other two were the ones that might stick with me, even though I didn't understand everything in them because they were way more political. So these were very amusing, and the fact that the translation, the English translation, is so modern and uses very modern language, I think it really heightens how, frankly, vulgar and rude a lot of these are. So many potty jokes, so many references to penises. Yeah. I was frankly astonished. I went into it expecting there to be some rude jokes, but the extent of it really surprised me. I mean, yeah. That was it. That was my Translateathon. I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing this. I don't know when the next round will be, but I am looking forward to it. So let me know if you have also read any of these, and if you have thoughts on them, leave them down below. If you participated in Translateathon, what did you read? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. And until then, bye.